Chris EUBANK Jr. steps on the scale at 160.05 pounds. So technically speaking and officially speaking, yes, Chris EUBANK weighed in over the weight limit. The headlines are screaming. Eddie Hearn is going on about Chris EUBANK Jr. missing weight. But let's get a little bit real about it. Who really missed weight? Conor BENN came in at 156.5, 156.5 pounds, when he knew well in advance that the weight limit was 160. He said he's made a big deal about having this terrific scientific strength and conditioning program and a professional nutritionist and a chef. So I was hoping that Conor BENN would step on the scale just a shade under 160, or certainly maybe even right at 160, without having to do a drastic weight cut as Chris EUBANK would. Now, given that Conor BENN has so many resources at his access, I'll assume, given the fact that he has a pretty good budget to spend on his own training camp, I would have thought that he would have gotten folks who could help him put on muscle mass responsibly over the course of, I'll assume this has been at least a 3-month camp. But in all reality, Conor BENN has been talking about this 160-pound fight for much longer than 3 months. So if that was truly his goal, he should have been working at this for over 6 months, maybe even up to a year. Now, I can attest to the fact that it is actually a more than realistic goal to put on anywhere between 5 and 10 pounds of quality muscle in less than a year. I can say that because I've done that myself. I haven't put on 10, but I certainly put on 5. And 5 pounds on me is like almost 5%. So it's perfectly reasonable that Conor BENN could have put on, let's say, 8 pounds of quality muscle. That would have bumped him up from his 154 to 164, and then he could, 162, and then he could have cut back those last 2 pounds in a fairly straightforward manner. It doesn't take that much effort for a fighter to lose 2 pounds, even someone my size. In fact, I would say most fighters, even females who lose weight with a little more difficulty than men, and even smaller women, we could lose 2 pounds in one sort of go at it, whether it's running with plastics or sitting in a sauna or doing some type of exercise with plastics on. Now, I have to say that boxers in general tend to be not so scientific, shall we say, as other combat sport athletes, like, well, judokas, like wrestlers, and like MMA fighters, in terms of doing the weight loss. Or should I say, really, it's the weight cut at the last minute. On top of that, you have a lot of old school boxing trainers who are of the mindset that a fighter shouldn't put on muscle. They have this saying that, well, it'll make you all muscle bound if a boxer does weight, so that's a bad idea. And that's absolutely not true. Maybe if you look at how people did weights in the past, perhaps that's true. Like if you just did a bodybuilding routine, yes, a fighter would put on muscle. The only goal for the bodybuilder is what we call hypertrophy, which is just to make the muscle grow. It's not for you to get stronger. It's not for you to develop more athleticism. It's just to build a better looking physique. So yeah, that would be detrimental for a boxer. But boxers most certainly should be lifting weights. And certainly if there's a boxer who wants to put on muscle mass, like I thought Conor BENN did, you absolutely need to pick up the weights to generate the right type of muscle growth and strength and maintain your athleticism. This absolutely can be done in conjunction with doing your regular boxing workouts. It's 100% possible. You just don't lift as often as someone who's trying to bodybuild, and you have to lift with a proper program to not overly fatigue yourself and to not necessarily, that's aimed more at building strength rather than hypertrophy. Now, that said, I'm going to assume that stepping on the scale at 156.5, which was really 155.5, because I think that gold pendant chain thing weighed at least a pound. So let's say he's about 156 at the most. I have to assume that was Team Benn's intended goal, for Conor to step on the scale at that amount. But what that also implies is he didn't cut weight to make that. Like, why would you do that? If you're sitting at 160 pounds, why would you say, oh, I think I'll go cut 4 pounds so I can come in even lighter than the limit? I also don't think it was a weight cut miss. Like, I don't think he was 162 or 163, and then he said, I got to go lose a couple pounds, and then accidentally lost like 4 pounds extra. That also doesn't seem realistic. So what that means to me is he's walking around 155.5 pounds. That gold thing weighs at least that much, right? So will he gain any weight? Well, perhaps a little bit, because the official weigh-in, which was probably not televised, the official weigh-in was earlier in the day. I think Eddie Hearn said it was supposed to be 11. Conor BENN showed up late, so 12. So they both gentlemen had the rest of the day to continue eating. Of course, that means EUBANK is going to put on more weight than BENN is by eating lunch and dinner. However, I don't expect Conor BENN to really gain a significant amount of weight between the weigh-in and stepping into the ring. It doesn't make sense. Why would he do that if he's already weighing in at his walk-around weight? And that's what we have to assume. He weighed in at his walk-around weight, which was whatever he weighed at, probably, say, 9:30 or 10 in the morning, because then they had to get the team together, leave, head to the weigh-in place. And so by the time they had to wait around for Chris to show up, it was noon. Now, the plus for this, for Conor, the only plus sides for this is the fact that he's not dehydrated. He doesn't have to rehydrate. He doesn't have to put his body through that. We'll assume he's been in a good mood all along, because he didn't have to do a horrible weight cut or anything. And he's not going through that sort of up and down, denying oneself, putting oneself through torture to make weight, then finally making the weight, and then being able to try to bounce back and recoup everything within 24 hours so that you can step in the ring and perform. Conor doesn't have to put himself through that sort of post-weigh-in drama, physical drama on his body. But let's look at what this weigh-in meant for Chris EUBANK Jr. 160.05 pounds. Well, let me tell you this much about that, 0.05. Some folks might be saying, well, who cares? You know, that's like if you had $160 or you had $160 and 1 nickel, does that 1 nickel really count? Well, in terms of making weight, absolutely, yes, it does, because you're supposed to step on the scale at that exact weight. Now, here's the question I have, though, because I do not believe Chris EUBANK Jr.'s 160-pound IBO belt is on the line. Is it? Because this did not get announced at the weigh-in. The announcer didn't say anything about this, for the IBO middleweight belt. So I'm assuming this is not a title fight, because if it were a title fight, that would mean both fighters may not weigh any more than 160 pounds. Now, most fight contracts that are non-title fights, the contract will read the fighting weight, in this case 160 pounds, and then typically there's a clause that says plus or minus 1 pound. I mean, that's almost a given in every single boxing commission, in every single fight contract. If you're not fighting for a title, they give you what they say a 1 pound weight allowance. So basically that means everybody is going to weigh in 1 pound over whatever the contract weight is. However, I'm not privy to what it says on EUBANK Benn's contract. I don't know if it says they may not, there's no plus or minus 1 pound. I guess not, because Eddie Hearn's going on about it, that Chris EUBANK missed by 0.05 of a pound. Now, here's the other thing. Hearn explained this by saying, well, EUBANK showed up 1 hour late to the weigh-in. He was supposed to be there at 11. He showed up at 12. Therefore, the commission did not give him much time to make the weight. So typically, if you step on the scale the first time and you're overweight, most boxing commissions will give you, say, a 2-hour window or a 4-hour window. Usually it's only 2, because, who wants to stick around for 4 hours, right? But you might have 2 hours to go try to lose that weight. And in most cases, fighters will go do that. You got to put on the plastics, put on the sweats, and jump rope or something. Maybe find a sauna. But according to Eddie Hearn, Chris EUBANK Jr. didn't even make the effort to lose that 0.05 of a pound. Now, how hard is it to lose 0.05 of a pound? Well, not to get too graphic, but basically, you got to go to the bathroom. You can do that. You should be able to get off that 0.05 of a pound. Now, the problem for Chris EUBANK Jr. is he might be already so dried out that that's not a possibility for him at the moment. But really, 0.05 of a pound is not that much to get out. So, you know, put on the plastics. It should take half an hour, not even, maybe just 15 minutes if you have plastics on and you go jump rope for a little bit. But I think Eddie Hearn might have been just a little bit more trying to make the point that Chris EUBANK Jr. didn't even make an effort to try to lose that 0.05. I can kind of understand EUBANK Jr.'s position on that. He's kind of like, well, the fight it's going to go on. They're not going to cancel the fight over 0.05 of a pound, which they're not, and there's not going to be much of a penalty, I wouldn't think, for 0.05 of a pound. But again, I'm not privy to what the contract reads. Here's what I will say on Chris EUBANK Jr.'s sort of in his defense. Well, at least it's not a 5-pound weight miss, and at least it's not a 3-pound weight miss. And we'll assume it wasn't intentional, that he did try to get to as close as he could to 160. The other thing is it's highly, highly realistic to think that one's own scale might be 0.05 of a pound off compared to the official scale. That's incredible. You know, that seems super likely. When you start talking, when fighters start saying things like, you know, oh, well, my own scale was, they try to explain a 1 or 2 pound weight difference in terms of which version of a scale is being used. I start to question. But 0.05, that's 5/100ths of a pound. Sure, your scale could be that much off from the official scale. That's quite possible. Is Chris EUBANK Jr. going to have to pay a fine for being 5/100ths of a pound over the 160-pound contracted weight? I mean, that's between Team EUBANK and Team BENN, I suppose, and maybe the commission. Again, not sure how that played out, but I don't think the money was really the point in this case. I think the weight disparity is. Again, Eddie Hearn is going on and on about EUBANK being so unprofessional for this 5/100ths of a pound weight miss, but I almost feel like I want to hear from Team BENN about why they decided to have their fighter come in almost 5 pounds under the weight limit, knowing full well that Chris EUBANK is going to rehydrate up. What does that 10-pound rehydration clause imply? So apparently tomorrow morning, meaning the day of the fight at 8 a.m., the fighters get to weigh in once more, and Chris EUBANK Jr. may weigh no more than 170 pounds. So I sure hope Chris EUBANK Jr. has the discipline not to make himself go so high up past 170 that he has to wake up in the morning Saturday, wake up the morning of the fight and have to do yet another weight cut of a couple of pounds to get down to 170. That would be really foolish on his part if he has that complete lack of discipline during these final few hours. Here's another factor that one has to take into consideration when making weight. Every fighter, male, female, all sizes, we all lose a certain amount of weight or body mass overnight. Simply by sleeping, you wake up a little bit lighter. Now, if you're paying attention to your weight as you're going through training camp, you will have figured out exactly how much weight you're going to lose overnight. Fighters, we used to call that how much weight you float. So for example, if I know I have to hit a weight of 106 pounds for a weigh-in in the morning, and I go to bed, and just before I jump into bed, I get on my scale and I'm 106.5 pounds, I know that I can float a half a pound overnight while I sleep, and I should wake up right on weight at 106 pounds. That 1/2 pound will get lost as I'm sleeping. So I certainly hope that Chris EUBANK Jr. and his team have figured out how much weight he floats overnight, so he can make sure he wakes up and he is, in fact, on weight at 170 pounds. He can probably suck it up from whatever time he wakes up till 8 a.m. 8 a.m. is an early weigh-in for boxing, and that certainly gives him enough time to get in his case, at least 2 really solid, perhaps 3 really solid meals. Since the EUBANK BENN main event is not going on till 10 p.m. London time, I think an 8 a.m. weigh-in gives both fighters enough time to have 3 full meals. So now, what does that imply for Chris EUBANK Jr.? If he steps on the scale at 8 a.m. in the morning, surely he could gain another 10 pounds up between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. at night. Now, I don't necessarily think that would be ideal for him to do that. I don't know. Again, that's between he and his team. Hopefully, they figured out what their goal is. 180, I think, is quite possible. Would it be optimal for him? That's the operative question. What's his optimal weight stepping between the ropes to engage in a 12-round fight? I think that Chris EUBANK Jr. could step into the ring at close to 180, like maybe 178, 179. But here's the thing. I don't think Conor BENN is going to weigh much more than he weighed today at the weigh-in. It just doesn't make any sense that he would put on a lot of weight. It would just be detrimental, in fact. So if Conor BENN's walk-around weight is about 155, 156, I say, and that was, like I said, that would have been his morning-ish weight, the morning of the weigh-in. I don't know if he felt like eating breakfast before he went to the weigh-in, or he just figured he'd hold off until post weigh-in to eat anything. But nevertheless, I would say he's not going to gain that much weight, maybe a few pounds. Because again, why would he torture himself to go below that far below 160 if he's already walking around below 160? So as long as Conor BENN has really rehydrated himself, I don't think he should have been that much dehydrated, but as long as he's operating at his optimal weight, I still think that might be just underneath 160 pounds. So the bottom line is that Conor BENN, Chris EUBANK, could be, there could be a difference of around 20 pounds tomorrow night when they step in the ring and look at each other in the eye from across the ring. So be sure to tune in tomorrow, because we will do a live for the Conor BENN, Chris EUBANK Jr. fight. That main event starts at 10 p.m. London time, 5 p.m. New York time, 2 p.m. Los Angeles time. So I will start the live stream at least 1 hour prior to the main event. So at least by 9 p.m., maybe even 8:30. We'll see how it goes. In order to catch some of the undercard. Which undercard fights are you interested in? I'm interested in Liam Smith. I'm a little bit interested in Chris Smith, but I think he might be way on the undercard, so I'm not so sure that I'll start in time to catch his fight. But I am interested in Liam Smith, and I'm interested in Anthony Yarde. So I'm hoping that their fights are a little bit closer to the main event. So if I start the live stream, it'll be around or when I start the live stream, it'll be around 1 p.m. Pacific time, which would be 4 p.m. New York time, which would be about 9 p.m. London time. So I will see you tomorrow at our live stream for Chris EUBANK Jr., Conor BENN. Tell me your fight predictions in the comments, and we'll see who gets it right tomorrow. I can't wait.